Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sean Fenske, Editor-in-Chief of Medical Product Outsourcing, and moderator for today's program. You've logged on to the MPO webinar, The DNA of a Successful M&A Process. Before we get started, I have some housekeeping announcements. For those of you who are interested in the information you hear today once the webinar has ended, or if you'd like to forward it to a colleague, this session will be archived for a year. The archive will be able to be accessed through the MPO website, which is at mpomag.com. Also, we will be accepting questions throughout the presentation. You can type your question into the box provided in the webcast window. We'll collect all questions and hold them until the end, but please feel free to type in questions as you have them. To enhance your viewing experience today, feel free to customize your window display. You can move the windows around by clicking on the top header space of each window and dragging them with your mouse. Also, you can activate the closed caption option by clicking on the CC button in your media player. Finally, share your reactions to the content being presented today with the emojis provided. Your feedback will be seen by today's speakers. And now, before I introduce those speakers, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, MedWorld Advisors. MedWorld Advisors is a boutique mergers and acquisitions advisory firm specializing in helping small to medium-sized medical device, medtech, biotech, biomed, dental, CDMO, and CRO, digital health, and healthcare services companies to reach their goals. Their M&A consulting experts create shareholder value for their mid-market clients by helping them to take their businesses through an M&A process that results in a successful outcome for all stakeholders. They work closely with financial buyers, including both strategics and private equity firms in the healthcare industry. With over 50 years of relationships in these markets and a true global footprint as a healthcare mergers and acquisitions advisories firm, the team at MedWorld is available to help you be successful in achieving and exceeding your stakeholder objectives. At MedWorld Advisors, value equals strategic fit plus timing. And now let's get started. Today we're joined by 5 members of the MedWorld Advisors team. Florence Joffrey Black, CEO and President, Dave Shepard, Managing Director, Kevin Criteriton, Managing Director, Daniel Shepard, Managing Director, and Estelle Black, Business Operations Director. Before we jump into the discussion, it's always good to know about who is speaking with us today. So Florence, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
We'll be happy to, Sean, and thank you for having us today. To all of you who are online with us as well, thank you for taking the time to take part of this webinar. As Sean mentioned, my name is Florence Joffrey Black. I'm the CEO of MedWorld Advisors, but I'm also one of the co-founders. I've been in healthcare for well over 25 years, and I've had the pleasure to work with healthcare companies around the world. Some of them, for example, have been in Germany or Israel, and some of them US-based. From being part of a number of different sizes of companies, from Fortune 500 to startup, but also companies ran by PE firms, I was involved in different part of the M&A process. And along the way, they started to feel that there was a different way for us to make a deal. One where owners had a true advocate on their side, but also where buyers came out of the process wanting to do more. And I think both sides are really important in making a successful deal. Along the way, I met Dave, who is the other co-founder of MedWorld, and he shared the similar views. And in 2015, we started MedWorld Advisors, and we've been making deals for family-owned businesses and lower middle market companies successfully ever since. So, as I mentioned, Dave is one of the co-founders. We're going to keep the intros fairly light. Dave, I'm going to pass it on to you.
Dave, I think you're muted.
Of course, I would be the first one to do that. So good afternoon, everybody. I am Dave Shepard, co-founder, managing director of MedWorld Advisors. Sorry you missed my first 10 seconds. It was probably the best part. But in going forward, introducing myself, just to give you an idea, I've been in the industry for a few decades. You can tell by some of the gray matter I have going up here. I started in the commercial side of the industry and grew up with companies like Becton Dickinson, Tyco Healthcare, Covidien, Medtronic, ran global business groups, did a lot of M&A in the process of that from the corporate side of the table, and did a lot of deal making. And at the end of the day, I really found that I really had a love for deal making and putting good deals together. and really a good skill set related to that. So when I met Florence, as she mentioned, we decided that it would be good to get on the other side of the table and help some of the companies that we had worked with before previously, types of companies, and be able to help them be prepared for a solid exit, to be able to exceed their stakeholder outcomes, and also to make sure that the deal lasts beyond transaction day, but into the legacy of the deal. And we'll be talking about that today around the M&A process. And I'll turn it over from here to one of our newer members, Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Crittenden, and I've been in the commercial leadership role in vitro diagnostic life science area. I've worked for companies of various sizes, from startup to Fortune 500. And I'll pass it along to Dan.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Daniel Shepard, Managing Director with MedWorld Advisors. I come from more of a financial background before joining MedWorld Advisors. It really was employee number one in 2016, and after figuring out that Dave and I wouldn't turn this into the next version of the Family Feud, decided to join full time, and it's been history ever since. I love pulling out the data from our clients to help kind of tell the story from the data that's there. So I look forward to kind of giving more details throughout this webinar. I'll pass it on to Estelle to finish this off.
Thanks, Daniel. Estelle Black here, Business Operations Director at MedWorld Advisors. I come from more of an operations background myself, and I've been with the team for almost 4 years now. Originally, when I joined, the company was about 6 years old, and they were growing and needed some support growing the business, some alignment, processes, that sort of thing internally. But I've recently transitioned to supporting our clients on the diligence front for our deals, which has been very exciting. So excited to be here today and share some of those diligence best practices for those who are listening. So Sean, I'll pass it back along to you.
Great, thanks, Estelle. Now I have a series of common questions for this group, many about the M&A process and using an advisor to assist with it. So the first question, we are speaking today about the DNA of an M&A process. Why do medtech business owners need a professional M&A process to sell their business?
Yeah, Sean, I think I'll get it started, and I think it's really important for business owners to understand, because most business owners, well, actually, if they're still standing, all business owners that are still standing have done a wonderful job in building something and creating something of value. And every business has its own DNA, and it has its own culture, and it has its own story. And to get to that point, they have their own skill sets that they've been able to do to be able to make their business successful. When it comes to exiting their business, it's something that they may only do once. Some people do 2 or 3 times, but they don't do it very often in their business, in their professional careers, and in their lifetime. And it's one of the most important things that they could do to make sure that what they've created, and they've created value to this point, that actually gets the value that they've earned for themselves, for their fellow shareholders, their stakeholders, and for the transaction itself, and for the legacy behind it. And it's really difficult for somebody who doesn't do this on a daily basis to really fully understand the process and make sure that they're getting the maximum out of the opportunity that they have for themselves and their stakeholders. And that's why it's really be good to have an advisor come alongside them, understand what their story is, and how do we create the story for the next chapter, for the successful outcome for them, for their value they created. Is there a next question, Sean? So I do.
I'm sorry about that. I was having an issue with my mute button.
No problem.
Yes, I do have many more questions, Dave. Thanks for asking. When does the M&A process start and end?
Quickly, before anybody else answers that question, Sean, I want to thank you for making me feel not bad for doing the mute button a little while. We're buds now.
Yeah.
Flo, I think you were going
to be alone.
Yeah. Flo, I think you're going to jump in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sean, I'll answer that one. So, one would think that the answer is pretty clear, right? The process really starts when you decide that you're going to sell your company, and it ends, when the transaction is complete. And it's true, but it's true to a point. we actually look at the start a little bit differently. We said that every business should start with the end in mind. And what we mean by that is it refers to what you've done in your company from day one. So whether you're a company that has been in business for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, or you're starting today, and we may have some of the new entrepreneurs online today, every decision that you've made along the way will actually have an impact in the way that your transaction is going to take place. Let me give you an example. When you start your business, you decide, are you going to be an LLC? Are you going to be a C Corp or an S Corp? Well, when you exit, these decisions that you've made early on actually will have an impact, for example, on your taxes. If you've grown and you've brought investors along the way, how did you bring those investors in? Do they have shares? How did you issue them, right? Do they have voting rights when you want to go and sell your business? Do they have to say, yep, we like this buyer or we don't? And if you've had partners that have, come and gone along the way, and it happens when you've been in business for quite some time, did you actually finish all the documentation, that has to do with getting those partners out of the paperwork, and it has to do with registration, state records, all of those things, right? So that's what we're saying, that, it really starts at the beginning. The earlier you can think of those topics, the better off you are. When it comes to the other side, you were asking about ending. It really does not stop once a transaction happens. It's truly a new page in the history of the company. Employees remain. Some of the owners actually will stay on board for a while. Everybody comes with a history, knowledge of the market, of the customer, the culture of the companies, right? And the legacy really starts from the time where the current owner passes on to the new one. And, this is really important for a lot of the sellers, that what they've started actually continues. And so for them, it may be a new ownership, but it really is a continuation of their company story.
Fantastic. So next question I have, when should a medtech business owner think about engaging an M&A advisor such as MedWorld to begin a formal M&A process?
Sean, I'll answer that question. Developing relationships and getting to know our clients' business is very important to us. The better we understand your business, the better we're able to successfully represent your business as well. There are some key drivers that will determine an engagement. Sometimes it's when you put together your growth and exit strategy and it's been finalized and you're ready to discuss or possibly implement that. It could also be that you've been approached by a potential buyer and you want to make sure that you're getting the best value and you would like to bring us into that conversation. It could also be that you need growth capital to take the company to the next level. There's also recapitalization. You want to take some chips off the table, but you want to keep an ownership stake. A desire to retire or to buy a new business or start another business. Those are just some of the things that could trigger an engagement as well.
And one thing I'll add to that, Kevin and Sean, is when you think about contacting an M&A advisor, there are good times where maybe it's fortunate for an owner and ourselves that we connect this month and next month we're launching a process together and it's a good outcome. Our average client, seller client that we met him 3 or 4 years ago actually, and so my informally. So the question was about formal, but informally, it's never a bad time to talk to somebody like ourselves. If you know somebody who's a professional advisor, to reach out and have a talk, have a conversation happen, so you can get thinking about some of the things that Florence mentioned earlier about thinking about the end in mind. Because some of the things I can be doing now to help me down the road. So anytime's a good time to have an informal conversation. And then like Kevin said, when's the formal start? Can be a lot of different times that are kind of situational in your business.
Great. So since it does start with an engagement, what makes a successful engagement?
Yeah, since I'm the one that does a lot of the getting clients started, I'll jump in again because it's really one of the things that's really fun for me. It's actually, just to be candid, it's an honor and a privilege for me when we have a chance to be invited into a business owner's home, so to speak, in their business, whether it's virtually on a call or on site. They've created something very special, and we get a chance to come into it and get a peek into it in the window, and to have the chance to help them along the way in their journey is fun for us. And so what makes a successful engagement really is that alignment between us and that selling company, the founders, the key stakeholders. And what we like to do first and foremost, before we think about anything about the exit process itself, we want to make sure that we're actually aligned with who the company is, what they've created, who they are right now, and what they can achieve in doing what they're doing. And then we think about, okay, now with the exit strategy, what are their opportunities in the market? What are the market trends right now? What kind of pathways could that exit look like? And the good news is there's multiple pathways. So we want to align, first of all, on who they are and we align together. The good news is a lot of our team comes from industry backgrounds. So a lot of times we ran companies that are similar in the nature, and that's part of our value is that we can help get to alignment quickly and be able to explain that to potential buyers. And so get that alignment on the company and then also the alignment on the process itself. And then that's really what makes a successful engagement is that we stay aligned and transparent and we act with integrity with each other every step of the way and the buyer through the transaction. That's really what makes a successful engagement. And ultimately that meets the stakeholder outcomes or exceeds them.
Fantastic. So maybe you can think of an example where it was clear that engagement made a difference for your client.
Good question, Sean. I'll go ahead and jump in on this one and color me biased, but I can think of more than a few. And actually, since I'm a big fan of data, when we jump into kind of looking at our past processes, we've found that from first offer to final offer, we've noticed an increase in the enterprise valuation of our clients' companies on average by 47%. So from the first offer we received from buyers, we're on average increasing that by 47% by the final offer, which our clients are very, very happy with. But I think to your question, one example that I can think of that's happened fairly recently, we worked with a client, family company, privately held, been in business for a couple of decades, and actually had a private equity firm that had been chasing them for about 20 years, been calling them, sending them emails, hounding them at trade shows, and really wanting to put themselves front in line for when that owner was ready to exit. So when we engaged with that client, they were pretty confident. They felt pretty sure that PE firm would be there in the end because that much interest must mean that there's value behind it. Well, ultimately, we ran a full process. We included all the global buyers that would have been interested in this opportunity, and at the end, the ultimate firm that ended up acquiring our client's company, the value that they attributed to our client's company ended up being about 75% higher than what that PE firm that had been chasing them had actually offered for the company. So it just goes to show that it's just because there's an express interest and there's a lot of people chasing doesn't mean that they're going to offer you the most value in a fully competitive process.
Yeah, Daniel, that's a great example, and that was a fun one to participate in. Sean, another example is we had a unique situation last year where we had a company in Europe that was kind of the parent company, and then we had a daughter company in Israel, and they were good family-run businesses, small companies on their own right, but small to medium size. But the reality was they had a certain value on their own, but together the collective value could really be impactful. And as we had a discussion about it, we agreed that actually it would be better to take them to talk to potential buyers as a package as well as one company going forward. And we were able to do that in working with them. And long story short, the ultimate value they got for the individual companies as a package was quite a bit greater than what they would have got on their own, and even what they were first thinking about they might get on together. And the company that's come in to work with them and invest in their growth capital to go forward, recapitalization go forward, they're very excited as well. So it was kind of a win-win-win solution.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we know, it takes both, sellers and buyers. Who are the sellers in this industry, and what kind of companies are the buyers looking for?
Sean, I'll take that question. The primary sellers that we work with are privately held companies, family businesses with no successors. And when you look at the buyers that we work with, the things that they want are lower middle market companies that have a positive cash flow and a proven track record, have a lot of upside market growth potential and opportunity, innovative and growth companies. If all the stars are aligned is great, but if all the boxes are not checked, that's okay as well. But that's one of the things that they are looking for, are those things that were just you just listed, some of them.
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, what we've really seen is that if you're in this industry and you've done a good job, you've really done something fantastic for yourself, because this industry, if you're a quality company, this industry, constantly you'll see that we get higher multiples in this industry than you do in other industries. And with the other thing we've been able to assess is through all different scenarios, through COVID, through the Ukraine war launch, through the Israel war launch when we had an Israel company to sell, all of those things. Brexit, we sold a UK company. MedTech companies hold up in value through all times because this is a great industry to be in, and we're going to always have growth over time. So if you're a quality company, somebody is going to be looking for you.
Great. So we've identified the sellers. Who are the buyers looking for these companies?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Sean, because I think when we've had clients come to us in the past, that there's a lot more buyers out there than I think most companies, most business owners realize. We'll often get comments about, we've had this one company contact us, we've had a couple over here, and they think that the buyer pool is relatively small. But more often than not, when we run a process, there's a buyer that ultimately acquires the company, that the client that we've been working with, that our client was unfamiliar with when we started that process. And that's because there are so many different types of buyer profiles out there right now. I mean, just on the strategic side, you've got your global strategics like Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic, but you've also got more medium-sized global strategics. You've got more regional players that might be more focused on the US or Europe, but they're looking for growth opportunities to how they can expand and really take the next step. On the financial side, of course, you have global PE firms that look to healthcare. As Dave mentioned, it's a really strong investment opportunity for them to put their money into. And then you've got smaller financial players as well, based in the US or Europe, looking at different opportunities. And then you've got family offices that have jumped into the game. So it really is a very large buyer pool, and that's why it can help to have somebody, an M&A advisor, to help you kind of navigate all those different types of buyers and see who's going to be able to align with the value that you've built for your company.
And one of the important things for sellers to think about is the assumptions you make about who's going to buy you. We recently had a process where the seller had two different companies reach out to them because they're a good business in a good space and they're doing well, and the quality company, and they're growing. So two different companies in their space actually reached out to them and said, hey, we might think about buying you. And that was partly what their impetus was, to reach out and talk to us and say, hey, would this be a good time to think about running a process? And we looked at everything in their market and made sense that we should do that. However, we encouraged them not just to rely upon those two companies. Let us do our job in terms of a professional M&A process, and let's reach out and scour the world, which we're pretty good about, involving buyers from Asia, US, Europe, and all that. And at the end of the day, within 3 months of the process, different things that happened to those two competitors internally, it was just around timing, that they were not able to stay in the process. And so if they would have just said, hey, I'm going to do this myself, talk to these two companies and take one of their offers, they would have been out of the game. But instead, because we had deployed our methods and our processes, we had some very excited, I think over a dozen offers for the company that we were able to screen through and get them into a top couple of really good bidders, that they've ultimately decided on one that really is a good fit for them going forward. So the legacy company will go really well, and they're probably better off than those original two companies would have been anyway. So it's it's probably fun for us when we're able to make that match between a good buyer and a good seller.
Great. Well, since we are talking about the DNA of an M&A process, can you outline the phases of a successful M&A process?
Absolutely. So obviously, there's a lot that goes into running a successful M&A process. Here at MedWorld, we like to break it down into 4 general stages. So for those of you watching, you can see on the screen, we have a pre-marketing, marketing, LOI, and execution phase. So just as a high level, you have the pre-marketing phase first. This phase begins once you've decided you're selling, you've chosen an advisor who's going to support you through the process, and you're ready to kick off this stage of your business's life. So during this phase, we work alongside our sellers to prepare the story that we're going to be telling to those potential buyers. So really what we're doing during this phase is aligning on the value proposition. we're creating documents that will present this value proposition. Some of those documents are the teaser. Sometimes that's called the one-pager. We also work on the SIM during this pre-market phase, and SIM stands for Confidential Information Memorandum. That's why we call it a SIM, and other relevant documents, of course. Really, during this phase, we're partnering as closely as we can with our sellers to make sure we're aligned moving forward to those subsequent stages. So after pre-market, we have marketing. And during the marketing phase, this is when we're reaching out to prospective buyers. As Daniel mentioned earlier, there's a lot of potential buyers. So we work alongside our clients to decide who is going to be the right group of targets to reach out to. And we use the documentation created during that pre-market phase during this marketing phase. Following the marketing phase, we get to the LOI phase, which is, of course, an exciting time for any seller because this is when your potential buyer pool actually becomes a lot smaller. Usually there's around 3 to 5 players at this point, but those 3 to 5 players are actually going to be providing bids for your business. So a very exciting time to get to. And if you've decided on a buyer during this LOI phase and you've signed an LOI, then you move on to the execution phase. This is when diligence comes into play so that the buyer can do more confirmatory look through of your business, make sure that they're aligning on strategies for the future. This is also the phase, of course, where you see the purchase agreement come together, other legal documents that are going to be relevant to transferring the ownership of the business to that buyer. And then, of course, what everyone's hoping for at the end, which is a successful close, and then, of course, an exchange of funds. So at a high level, those are the stages that you're looking at for an M&A process.
Fantastic. Thanks, Estelle. Let's dig into these a little bit. So, what goes into a successful pre-market phase?
There's actually a lot that goes into a pre-market phase. It's really, if you will, the foundation of the entire process. And what really goes into it are a number of things, and some of them are more obvious than others. But the first one is actually creating a collaborative, I can't say that properly today, environment with the seller. And by this, I mean, we become truly part of the team. This is the time where we just try to learn as much as we possibly can about your business, about the people that run the business, the customers that you have, your history, everything that you have done, again, since you've started your business. And, it's important to really understand all of this so that we can actually represent it the right way. And as Estelle mentioned, create a good value proposition story going forward. So we really go and ask a lot of questions. Estelle is going to talk about something that we call pre-due diligence, which is something that we uniquely do here at MedWorld. But ultimately, it is about creating the first, basically, documents that are going to be seen by a potential buyer. So the teaser that she mentioned, one pager, this is really something that does not tell a lot other than what the ultimate company or proposition, actually opportunity, happens to be. We're not talking about the name of the company. Usually all of this is kept confidential, but we are giving kind of a tease, that's why it's called a teaser, as to what the opportunity really is. And then the SIM that Estelle mentioned, the Confidential Information Memorandum, is something that we build during this pre-marketing phase. That's really something we call the book, and that can be 70 pages and up. And it's everything that a buyer would want to know about the company. So think about, again, we talked about, how the organization is structured, but it's also your financials, your taxes, your competitive environment, your market opportunity, your customer base. All of those are covered in that document. And as we do this in parallel, we also work with our clients on the management deck, which is something that will be important when they go to the marketing phase. In being able to talk to a potential buyer and tell their story into a more live, and when I say live, it could be a virtual environment when they're talking to a potential buyer. So those are some of the things that are taking place. I'm going to pass the pre-due diligence topic over to Estelle. As she mentioned, that's her area of expertise. I'll have her cover that.
Thanks, Flo. So yeah, something that MedWorld Advisors does that I think is really beneficial for clients is this pre-due diligence process. Diligence is a heavy uplift for any company, whether you've been in business for 5 years or 40 years. And we know that it's going to be something that we have to work through later on in the process. But just because it happens later in the process doesn't mean we can't prepare for it early. So fortunately, because this is what we do for a living, we actually know the general documentation that a buyer will be asking for when the official diligence part of the process begins. We know they're going to be looking for articles of association, incorporation papers, agreements with your customers, distributors, historical financial information, your balance sheets, things of that nature. We know that. And so if we work with our clients early on in this pre-market phase to begin pulling these documents together, it's really going to help them later on. Of course, they'll have documentation that's ready to be shared right away with their buyer when diligence officially kicks off. An important part of diligence and just in deal making in general is keeping momentum positive. And so if we have information to present to the buyer during that diligence phase right off the bat, then it's something that actually is very positive for the momentum of the deal. It also buys our sellers a little bit of time to respond to questions that maybe we can't anticipate, because each buyer is different and will be curious about different things based on what's important to them. In doing this also, we're looking at this documentation, building these documents, the teaser, the SIM, the management presentation, like Flo mentioned. And while we're looking at this, we can actually mitigate risk and identify any gaps that could be gating items later on. It's, of course, our job to, as advisors, to make sure that we're preparing our client as best as we can and making sure that they're presented in the best light. And we can help position our clients if we know the ins and outs of the business. Nothing needs to be a surprise necessarily. So in doing this pre-diligence phase, diligence is often seen as a scary word for sellers, but we find that if we perform this process, we actually take a lot of that scariness away and are really empowering our sellers to feel more confident when diligence actually comes into play.
And it's also one of the times that we really think about not only how we create the value proposition, but we also make sure that the sellers get the value proposition they created when the deal is executed. There's a lot of horror stories down there around financial firms doing diligence, and then they had offered 100 million. Now they're only going to be at 90 million because they found something in a closet somewhere or whatever. And what we do in our process is where every company is beautiful, but we all, as beautiful people as we are and companies as we are, we all have our own imperfections somewhere. And so what we want to do is make sure we get that all out, because we want to have transparency and integrity in a process on both sides. That's how you have a successful execution of a process and a legacy for the company. But we make sure we get all that out and we say that, and we actually tell the story in the right way about all the things that have happened that are imperfect and not perfect. And so when they get to that stage, they can't be deducted from the company because the buyer already knows about it. In fact, they actually understand that's part of the culture of how the company was built. So it starts right from the beginning.
Great. So maybe now you can speak to the approach to the marketing phase.
Yeah, Sean, I'll go ahead and jump in on that one. And I think this is we can call all of these phases important, but I think this is a really important one where some of our healthcare expertise really pays off in combination with all the preparatory work we did in the pre-market phase. But I think one of the biggest things we're thinking about when we approach the marketing phase is we want to make this a competitive process. And in order to move buyers forward in the process, because all of these buyers that we talked about, they're seeing hundreds of opportunities. a year, maybe thousands, really, depending on how large of a company they are. So the better we're able to relay the value proposition of our client and really what the opportunity is about, the more people we're able to move forward. And because we're able to put that work in the pre-market phase and really with the healthcare focus that we have is really set up that messaging for the process for the buyers to really help that resonate with the buyers we're speaking to, that ultimately helps us to move more buyers towards the getting the market feedback we like to see at the end of the marketing phase and trying to receive as many indications of interest as possible. I think you'll see at the end of the marketing phase, we're really looking to get that general market feedback so that we can in alignment with our clients, because it's always our clients' process and it's always with their choice as far as how we move forward. We will move some of those some of those buyers that really aligned the best with our clients' value and the value they've built with their company in order to take them forward into the next phase, which we call the LOI phase.
Great. And what are the big milestones or KPIs in the marketing phase?
Oh, Yeah, that's a good question, Sean. I think just like a lot of medical device companies here, we do track KPIs throughout our process because we want to be able to tell our clients about the momentum that we're having in a process, and it also helps us to kind of think about thinking about our process dynamically and if we need to pivot in any way. So I mean, there's of course a more simpler KPIs like just getting out the teasers and who opens our documents and how many meetings we're having. But I think there's also bigger KPIs that we look to, like having NDAs executed. Right? I think especially for strategic companies, they don't sign non-disclosure agreements lightly. I think that there really is the kind of that first step towards an expression of interest from that strategic company that they're putting an NDA in place. So the more NDAs that we have executed in the process, the better we feel about the momentum moving forward, and it moves forward. Like how many people are having those management discussions, and then how many IOIs are we receiving? All those KPIs are important for us to track so that we're able to collaborate with our client to have as much success as possible.
Great. And during the marketing phase, do you get no's at that phase?
Absolutely. No is appreciated and is part of the process. You can actually get a no at any time throughout the process. It's just not the marketing phase. And you can get no's for various reasons. Prior to joining MedWorld, I've seen where deals were turned down or they got a no either because the deal size or the company financial documents were not in place, or low customer concentration. Could be other factors that's involved. But getting to know quickly is really important because it helps to not waste time with the wrong buyer. Also, what really sets MedWorld apart is our process is designed to efficiently identify who are the right buyers and weed out the buyers that's not a good fit. So this allows us to move productively and focus all of our energy on the right buyers for our clients, and it benefits our clients because you have a faster process, a higher enterprise value, as Dan had mentioned, and you have a much more successful outcome. So managing through that is part of the process that we put in place.
Great. And I know our next section is LOI, but perhaps first you can explain what an IOI is, and is that different than an LOI?
Yeah, understand, Sean. We get that question a lot, and just to simply put, IOI is an indication of interest, and LOI is a letter of intent, and we do think of them differently in our process. Of course, at the IOI is a more informal indication of interest that they're going to provide at the end of that marketing phase, and then the LOI is something that will be a little bit more structured and a little bit more formal about how they intend to structure their offer for the company. And in both cases, we provide the structure that to the buyers for what we want to see and what our clients need to know before they make their decision. So we'll put out a process letter in both cases, both in the marketing phase and the LOI phase, that really tells our buyers, each item that we need to see so that our client can have clarity before they move forward with a particular buyer.
Great. And for the LOI phase, how does that impact stakeholder outcomes?
Yeah, I'll circle back to my comment about from first offer to last offer. On average, Sean, we see the enterprise valuation of our clients, of our companies, go up between about 47% on average between the first offer and the final offer. I'm just repeating myself, but hope you got that. But the LOI phase is really important for us. I think that's as I mentioned, this is where we narrow down that buyer pool in alignment with our clients to about 3 to 5, and that allows us to have a little bit more intimate, get to know each other, because once there's going to be a partnership after the acquisition. There's post-acquisition integration. You're going to be working together with these people for a while. So we want to make sure that it's they're able to understand who these buyers are, and we'll invite the buyers out to the company's facility, have a little bit more intimate meetings, provide a little more information, and that helps those 3 to 5 buyers, whoever's in the final stage of the process, to really kind of get their hands around the opportunity more, to visualize what that'd be like for them to have that either as a different business unit for a strategic company, or as a platform investment if it's a private equity firm, and that helps them to kind of really put more value to what that would be like for them if they were to write that check and be the winning buyer. And I think, just imagine if you had the opportunity to buy a house, right? What was it like for the first time you walked inside that house and really felt what was it like? Like, okay, this is mine. There's a different feeling there, and I think that's what we see a lot in that LOI phase.
Great. So, once an LOI is executed, what's the next step? What happens next?
So next is diligence, Sean, and I'm so glad you asked this question because we actually just hit this milestone at the beginning of this week with one of our clients. So the LOI has been signed. You've chosen a buyer that's meeting your stakeholder objectives, and that's exciting to you. And of course, that you're looking forward to working with, right? We've been talking about that legacy piece a lot today. But between closing, right, or between signing that LOI and closing, you do have to work through diligence. So diligence is really, as I mentioned, when the buyer is confirming what they've learned from you and your team up to this point. And I am hitting that point home of the fact that it's confirmatory and not discovery, because really, if you've been preparing well and aligned with the vision and what you're doing throughout this whole process, what your buyer has found out and will be looking at during this diligence phase should be the same. There shouldn't be anything that they're discovering that would hurt your value or the bid that they've put on your business. So everyone on both sides, buyer and seller, wants diligence to go well. They want it to go quickly. The seller, of course, is hoping to get through diligence quickly and close the deal so that they can see those stakeholder objectives have been met and, of course, get that check. But the buyer wants to go through diligence and make sure that they truly know what they're buying and that there are no discoveries. Diligence can sometimes feel intrusive for a seller, whether you're a founder who's been there since day one, or an owner, or even just a CEO who's been part of the story. You've built this company for many years, and it probably feels very personal to you. So in diligence, your baby, I guess you can say, is really being put under a microscope, right? The buyer is going to lift the hood. They're going to take apart your engine, and they're really going to ask you questions about everything. So often what you see during diligence is the buyer brings in third parties to support them in multiple work streams. You'll see financial, you'll see legal, commercial sometimes, software, or a technical work stream, depending on your company and the product that you have. And each of these work streams is providing their own request lists, their own questions that they want to get answered, and they're holding their own sessions as well to get these questions answered and to really understand at a deeper level what your business is. So this is really the part of the process where we see that pre-diligence process that we did in the pre-market phase really show the benefit. But I think what's often not talked about in this execution phase is, and in part of this diligence phase, is what's really exciting about it, because during this phase, the buyer and the seller are actually making plans for the future. They're having strategy sessions, discussing what the right direction to take the business into in the future is, and they're really confirming this partnership that's been building since the marketing phase, and seeing where it's going to go in the future. So it is a really exciting time, even if sometimes diligence can feel a bit of a process that you have to go through. During the execution phase as well, this is when the purchase agreement is being put together. Any other specific legal documentation that's going to be relevant to closing the deal happens now. That could be coming up with insurance, for example, things of that nature. But of course, at the end of the execution phase is what everybody's hoping for, which is the deal close. So the execution phase, there's a lot to get through, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's a pretty good light. So.
Well, I can guess from that great answer, but I'm going to ask anyway. Does the diligence phase have an impact on a successful deal?
Yeah, Sean, obviously every phase has an important impact on it. But what's really good about the diligence phase is all the things that activities that Stella described. But one of the results is the buyers and sellers get closer together. They really get to know each other, because at the end of the day, a deal coming together really is built on relationships. It's built on so many things, but at the end of the day, you have to like each other to make a good deal. The relationship gets stronger, and therefore that the post-transaction, the legacy of the partnership even gets stronger. And we see that happen over and over again through the diligence phase. Although there can be some ups and downs when some of the questions are answered, overall, it's really exciting to see partnerships come together during this phase.
Great. So we've gotten through all of that. Diligence is done. What happens on the transaction day?
Yeah, transaction day, the day everyone's been working so hard to get to. So transaction day, it seems simple at the end of this big process, but the documents, the purchase agreement, all of those things are signed by both parties. There's, of course, the exchange of funds. But most importantly, I would say, is the celebration of the hard work that everyone's done to this point. And of course, the celebration for what's going to come in the future in this new partnership, which is really the day I think everyone looks forward to.
Fantastic. And what about after that? I mean, is everything done, or is there things that happen after transaction day?
Oh, there's a lot that happens after transaction day. One of my favorite topics. It's part of the process, even though we're not writing it, as part of the stages, because in some ways you would think that our work is done, but we really have grown very close to our seller. We've known the buyer. Really, at the end of the day, when the transaction happens is where the next stage, happens, basically, is where the integration starts, but also the legacy begins, right? When we work with our sellers, and I think Dan mentioned that a number of times, so did Estelle and Dave and Kevin, we really take the time to understand what's important for them, right? And there's always a financial picture that comes into play. What does a business owner want to have for all the work that they've done? But there's something else that comes into play, right? If you've built your business for 30 years, you've had an impact on your employees, on your community, and all of those things. And so, it's important to really understand how that continues in the future. And I'll take an example of a company that we sold where, the owner had been building this company for over 30 years, became one of the largest employer in the town, and, was very well known, was a pillar of the community, and was walking away. For that person, it's a retirement, it's moving on to the next phase of life. It was really important for that owner to make sure that his employees would be taken care of. They would be there, that the culture would continue, the town would not lose the important part that that business played, and that his name and his legacy would continue, whether, today or in 20 years. And so the buyer that, ended up, buying the business was really in tune with that. And, it still continues today, that legacy is being built. And it's really nice to see. And that's really what we call a win-win at the end of the day, is when you have a seller and a buyer, that even after the transaction, things continue in a positive way.
Great. So in summary, can you highlight what makes MedWorld a successful M&A advisor for its clients in this industry?
There are a lot of things that actually I think make us special, but if I'm going to pick up some of the top ones, one of them is we understand healthcare. We come from the healthcare environment. We know the industry. We haven't talked about some of the things that are specific to us, like regulatory, is a big part of the story for a lot of the companies that we work with. We're global, which is a little bit unusual. We really take the time to understand and know our buyers, right? So the team that you meet at the beginning when you start working with us, or you want to talk to us, is most likely the team that you're going to be working with throughout the process. And that really is important. We get to know you, but you get to know us. And that really becomes a very personal relationship in a way that we really understand what's important to you. And we keep that in mind. We're very respectful of our sellers. I think we've talked about this. We have a process, and it's a well-run process. But our clients make the decision. They're ultimately the one making the choice, right? We're here to advise, but they are the ones making the decision. And so that's something that I think puts us in a very unique category, in a unique position, when we work with our clients. And I will say that, on as someone who's, run this company now for 10 years, one of the things that I take the most pride in is the fact that the people that actually were our clients are probably our biggest advocates, the one that, we'll talk to some of our future business, clients and say, hey, you should go with this company because we now have a relationship with them. We know them. We know their kids. We go and visit them if they're international, and we go and have dinner with them. The conversation and the relationship continues, and that's important for us. So I think that makes us, in a way, a unique kind of company.
Great. So when and why should medtech owners contact MedWorld about a possible M&A process?
Yeah, I think coming back to that, we touched upon it on early. If somebody's just thinking about a process, 5 years from now or 5 days from now, they should reach out to us and have a conversation because for them, who would they have as an advisor? It's important to have a good relationship with. We need to have alignment. We need to have transparency of communication and integrity among us because we're going to be a team to go together to work to help to facilitate getting that stakeholder outcome that you're looking for. So any time is really a good time to contact us about a process, whether it's now or in the future. And we're happy just to have conversations with no charge, to give information, share things, and just be as transparent as possible about what's going to take place and develop relationships because they matter for us as well. And so that we have the right relationship at the right time with our potential future clients.
Great. So, and finally, before we turn it over to the audience questions, since we know this webinar only allows time for a high-level overview of the DNA of an M&A process, is there anything the panel would like to add, to what has already been stated?
Yeah, actually, I think I'm gonna ask Kevin because Kevin's new to MedWorld, so he's had some other experiences. Kevin, you want to add anything?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add is prior to MedWorld, for several years, I was a deal source consultant for a large PE firm. They had about 1.5 billion under management. And what I learned was that PE firms are very selective with their investment funds. They come with a lot of criteria around what type of investments that they can do and things that are required. They will review hundreds of deals and only invest in maybe one or two. If you rely on your own network or try to search and find an investment partner, it's a challenging process. How well do you know that particular firm or their investment criteria? Do you have a relationship with the firm? Are they the best fit for your company? Do you know anyone that's helping to advocate for your firm? At MedWorld, we have relationships with hundreds of firms and strategic partners globally, which is, one of the key things that we bring, to our clients. And this gives us a bigger toolbox in finding the right investor for your company.
Great. Well, thank you to all of you for those thorough and informative responses. Once again, don't forget this presentation will be archived on mpomag.com for a year. Now it is time to get to those questions and answers, our question and answer session, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. The first question we have is, let me just scroll down here. We have, what is the average time for an M&A process for a smaller company? I know there is no set time, but what is the expectation average?
Yeah, Sean, I think I'll jump in here. And one thing I'll say is, if we don't get to all the questions, I know you're going to put them out there. We'll put them in our newsletters going forward, the questions that weren't unanswered. But if you need an urgent response, feel free to, you got our contact information, feel free to DM us or call us, and we'd be happy to give you an urgent answer. But to answer that question, there is no set time, but every process is unique. But for the most part, for a rhythm of a good middle market company, even a smaller company, it's typically somewhere between 6 and 12 months. 6 is going to be the fast time. 12 is going to take a little bit longer, but probably on average is about 9 months for a good middle market process. To do it right, to make sure we're doing the process that's thorough, it's transparent, we don't make any mistakes on your behalf, on our behalf, that the buyers understand who you are, they understand your value and the value of going forward. It's somewhere in that time frame. Again, it could even go a little bit faster than that, but you probably wouldn't want to because you might be losing out on some potential buyer relationships. And sometimes it could go a little slower if things happen in the marketplace or the company, like we did have a pause during COVID, where actually our company didn't lose value that we were working with, but there was a little bit of a pause due to market uncertainty, that sort of thing. But on average, I'd say 6 to 12 months.
Great. And almost as a follow-up to that question, we have another question related to that. On average, if there is one, how long does pre-market take?
Daniel, you want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a set time. We try to shoot for somewhere around a month to get ourselves up to speed and then get to the marketing phase so that we're talking to buyers about the process. However, I think to Dave's point, we're really more concerned about getting it right than getting it fast. So we want to make sure that we are working with our client to understand, what the messaging is and what the story is going to be and where we're heading before we launch it. But on average, I'd say a month.
Great. Next question we have, is it typical to have an earn out regarding purchase price? If so, what's the time limit?
I would not say it's typical. Most of the deals we have, we try to encourage to get to the valuation without an earn out. However, sometimes it's necessary because sometimes there just is a valuation gap between the buyer and seller, and they want to work together. And so then you would put together, you would put together an earn out to make that happen. What we try to recommend on the side of our seller clients is that they actually would put together earnouts that they know that they can control and they're achievable. Because you get things that they cannot control, then you're not sure you can achieve them, and then you may be losing value in the process. But there's a lot of other nuances that go into that. But I hope that answers the question at a high level.
Great. And again, they can always reach out to MedWorld for further detail. So another question we have, what qualifies as a middle market deal?
I think, Daniel, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, I think the middle market is a wide range, and I think really for this audience and for what we're speaking for today, we really focus on companies that are up to 25 million in EBITDA. Generally, companies that are up to I'd say 250 million total enterprise valuation is the lower middle market that we're kind of speaking to today, and the middle market can go a little bit higher than that, but that's really where we're focused.
Great. And I think we have just enough time for one more. I'm a digital health company with recurring revenue and high growth, but no profits. Will buyers be interested?
The answer is yes, and that's an interesting space. We could probably have a whole separate webinar on. As you know, you follow this at FPO, Sean, that there was a whole lot of investment in digital health between 2010 and through COVID. And then a lot of companies even spacked out and did lots of different things. Some of those companies have weaned out, but in the meantime, there's a foundation of really good, strong digital health companies that are competing for space. And they need to have a bigger home in many cases. And this is actually a trend that's going on in the marketplace. And so in that process, what the buyers are looking for, sometimes financial buyers, sometimes it's a strategic buyer, what they're looking for is companies that have just demonstrated traction. So that's the biggest challenge that digital health companies have, is getting traction. You don't have to have you don't have to have profit, but if you're showing traction relative to your ARR, your annual recurring revenue, and you're showing that you have good margins, there's a deal to be made.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, though, that is all the time we have for today's presentation. I'd like to thank our panelists, Florence, Dave, Kevin, Daniel, and Estelle, for their insights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, MedWorld Advisors, for its support. Finally, I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for attending this session. I hope you found it to be a valuable experience.
Thank you, Sean.